Hello and welcome to Doing Does DVD, and this is Disney Classics number 56, Ralph Breaks the Internet. The final film in this box set. After just over a year, we finally reach the end. Feels like I've been doing this for much longer than a year, but obviously 2020 has been, a bit of a special year, shall we say. This being the last one probably brings up some questions about things like Frozen 2, but we'll talk about that at the end. The focus of this video, let's stick with the Ralph Breaking the Internet. Of course, interesting technicality is that when this box set was released in 2018, Ralph Breaks the Internet wasn't actually out yet. However, they knew it was about to be released in cinemas, and so in the box set they left an open space where you could buy the disc later and add it. But thankfully, at least, the disc art for the single release matches the rest of the set. Because that's one of my biggest annoyances when it comes to, collecting discs, is that when multiple entries in a series end up changing the design part way through, so the whole thing as a whole doesn't match. Quickly looking in the background, Lost is a prime example of that. But anyway, let's talk about the film itself. This is one I have not seen before, so I don't know very much about it. I know a small synopsis about they have to go onto the internet in order to order a part to fix one of the arcade machines. But the thing is, I really enjoyed Wreck-It Ralph, but I have seen some fairly mixed, mediocre reviews and opinions about Ralph Breaks the Internet, and so that gives me worry that it's not going to quite live up to the original, and then in turn kind of end this entire series on a bit of a low note, which would be a shame. But I think a big part of this is going to be how they represent the internet. Like in the original, the only really sort of outside the game type stuff was the central station in the power network. But then how they extend that into, the entire internet is going to be quite interesting, because there have been all sorts of visual representations of cyberspace over the years with all sorts of different ideas and qualities, things like the Lawnmower Man or Tron, and I think it's going to depend a lot on how kind of stereotypical they get, and how much they rely on brands that are going to end up being quite dated, and then how they deal with possible weird story holes about how in theory there are multiple copies of all these arcade machines throughout the world, and if they are all capable of connecting to the internet, then there are multiple copies of the same character available to travel around this world. They could in theory meet themselves, and while in theory those selves are based on the same base code, they will have had different life experiences. But somehow I get the feeling this film probably isn't going to explore that angle. It's just going to be a sort of more fun adventure on the internet with some rather dated internet jokes. So I'm trying to not let my hopes be too high for this, so that I don't have to end this series on a bit of a low note. So I think the time has come for the last one of this box set. Let's watch it and find out what it's all about. Well, thankfully, that was not as bad as I was worried it might be. Was it as good as the first one? I don't think so, but not by much. The thing is, the scope in this one is so much larger that it's a very different kind of story, and it sort of makes comparisons a bit unfair. But I think probably the biggest part of that is the first one was, new and fresh and exciting, whereas this one, by virtue of being a sequel, can't be those things. And then the problem that I still don't really connect very well with Ralph as a character. I just don't find him particularly interesting. Thankfully, we've still got the amazing Vanellope kind of carrying this, at least in my opinion. But then every other character from the first film is kind of sidelined at this point to just background or cameo. Like, there was nowhere near enough Calhoun for me personally, but you know, they filled that space by meeting plenty of new characters on their journeys on the internet, and the character of Shank kind of filled the Calhoun void for me in the end. But there is a lot more fun to be had once Ralph and Vanellope go to the internet, which looks really well designed, although maybe not particularly innovative. It's basically just a ginormous futuristic looking city. Different websites being different buildings, and you know, users going about in flying cars and stuff. But there, of course, there are a great many Easter eggs to look out for in the background, which was fun. And later on, there are some more interesting design things that you start to notice about how the whole thing is sort of built on layers, and everything's, you know, built on top of what was there before. At one point, Ralph finds himself at the bottom levels of the internet, and there's all sorts of rubbish and broken things lying about, signs for GeoCities and MySpace, and, you know, things that aren't really used on the internet anymore, but it was built upon. Of the more present-day references on the upper levels, I was surprised that, you know, everything there still seemed kind of up-to-date and relevant. Although, of course, this film was only from 2 years ago. And so the things I noticed weren't that they were, you know, featuring now-defunct sites. There was no big Vine section or something. But more it was the absence of new sites that have become popular since then. Particularly, there's no references to TikTok. And much like the games in the original film, they've got a bit of a mix here when it comes to web services, where some of them are actual real ones and some of them are made-up ones for the point of the story. Which is good, because the made-up ones won't ever feel dated because they never actually existed in the first place. Although, of course, if you spent any time on the internet, it's fairly obvious to know which services these made-up ones are analogous to. Story-wise, it didn't do anything with the potential multiple identity nature-nurture thing I kind of mentioned in the intro was a possibility you could go with this story. But, you know, it does have some nice things to say about, you know, friendship and identity and the meaning of life, all wrapped up in a fun and visually interesting bow. I knew it was coming thanks to the internet and thanks to trailers, but the whole part where they visit the Disney section of the internet was actually surprisingly fun. I was kind of expecting it to be more sort of a one-scene meta joke, but it kind of ended up being far more important to the story and the plot, and also for what will be the last review in this series, really nice to see all the Disney princesses again in one place, having them all bond as a group with Vanellope and sort of explain what it is to be a princess, leading of course to Vanellope getting her own song, which is of course called Slaughter Race, which was even written by Disney superstar Alan Menken. So what I originally presumed was just going to be like a one-off meta joke turned out to be one of the best parts of the entire film. In terms of looks and animation and rendering, which we've talked about quite a lot over this series, there isn't actually a lot to add on this one. There's no particular reaching for photorealism here because it's not the real world, although the in-game world of Slaughter Race does look particularly lovely because that's supposed to be, you know, a modern online racing game. The one big feature here seems to be the size of everything. In terms of digital assets, the amount of characters and the amount of buildings and the amount of movement they've got on the screen. In those terms, this was the biggest Disney animation film they've done so far. And so I think that's about it for Ralph Breaks the Internet. Not entirely perfect, but still a solid follow-up to an excellent original. And also notably, the first Disney animated sequel to be made by the same writers and directors who made the original. A nice, easy, happy and fun end to my year and a bit of Disney classics. And speaking of ends, the obvious question is, what's next? What about Frozen 2? So this series is just following this Disney Classics box set, which only goes to 2018. So that doesn't include Frozen 2. And so the short answer is no, I'm not going to be doing Frozen 2. The slightly longer answer is that I'm not going to do Frozen 2 right now, but maybe one day. For an even longer answer, come back next week where I'm going to do a final big conclusion, overall summary kind of thing. So, as always, tell me about your thoughts about Ralph Breaks the Internet in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next week for the Disney Classics conclusion.